cool finish that I'm super excited to share with everybody. And it's going to be a kind of a two-tone kind of finish, because part of the piece is going to have one finish, the other parts are going to have something else. In this particular piece, it's going to be a hammered copper look, which is I'm super excited to show you guys. So the drawers and the side panels have these really cool like faux nails in here that I'm going to do the hammered copper part to, and then the frame, top, legs, and everything else is going to get a really awesome black, solid black look. And then over top of the hammered copper, we're going to do a black glaze to kind of tie in the black to the frame and everything else. It's going to be really cool. Super excited to share this one. So again, it's going to be hammered copper is what I'm going to show you, but the finished piece is going to have a two-tone kind of look to it to tie it all in together. It's going to be really cool. So to do this, we're using General Finishes products for this entire project, and per General Finishes instructions, which is usually what I go by when I'm doing my pieces, they recommend a denatured alcohol 50-50 with water to clean all their pieces prior to use, which is what I do. So I have my spray bottles, 50-50 water to denatured alcohol. And then what else you're going to need is lamp black is going to be your base coat, and that's going to be the base for everything. The whole piece, even underneath the hammered copper that I'm going to do, because when you're doing the pouncing or the stippling, whichever term you want to call it, to give it the hammered copper look, you're going to hit down to the base coat and bring out the black. So you're going to start with base coat of black all over. Some spots are going to stay black, so we're going to get the hammered copper look. Then next we have the high performance. The high performance is going to go on pretty much everywhere as well. The high performance is going to go on to cover the black, to give it a nice little sheen, keep it protected. But it's also going to go as a barrier between my paint and then the next step, which is the copper. And we're going to do that so that way when I do the stippling or all that kind of stuff, I can really move stuff around without having to worry about it sticking too quickly. So you give yourself a barrier. So then of course that next step, like I said, is going to be pearl effects. And this is copper pearl, so you get that copper look. Really cool stuff. I mean, if you get some sample boards and play with it, just buy some, play with it, try it out. It's cool stuff, but you'll see what I'm going to do with this piece with it. And then the very last step will be the glaze over top. We'll go through each step individually, but these are the things you're going to need to get you to that final, piece that we're going to do. I'm super excited, like I said, about showing this one, how to do it. I think this is going to be a really cool thing that people are going to really like. And you might end up doing a whole piece of this, just the hammered copper look. But as I said, this piece we're going to have a little two-tone thing, because I just think this piece warrants a little bit something different rather than just doing the whole thing in the hammered copper. But for the sample we're going to do, it's going to be just the drawer, and then you'll see the whole piece in the final pictures when I'm done. So that's it for now. Next step is going to be just simply doing the base coat. I'm going to skip the cleaning part. I mean, cleaning is primarily just spraying on, wiping off, and if you feel like there's any spots that need to be sanded, like when I pulled off the knobs, there's some spots here that maybe just need to be, leveled out a little bit. But that's it for this. Just spray on, wipe off, clean off any, polish or whatever that might have been on there first. And then after that, then the first step will be the painting, which I'm going to go straight to. Just kind of show you how I do it with General Finishes. It's a little different on the Amy Sloan's and the other paints that I've used. So just kind of give you an idea of how I do it. And that's going to be it for now. Like I said, next step will be painting, and then after that we'll go straight into the high performance, which I also paint and or brush on depending on what kind of piece I'm using at the time. So that's it for now. Alright, so our first step is going to be painting. After I've cleaned it, got it all cleaned off, ready to go, first step is going to be painting. Now with what I found with the General Finishes is you really need to stir it. There's going to be a collection of stuff at the bottom. A lot of times they're thicker, and you really got to mix it all up real good. So always have one of these handy. Sometimes you can just shake it like I've used half this can, you can shake it up. I recommend not just shaking, I would definitely recommend getting right into it, digging down in around the corners and just stirring it up real good. I've just found that this is a little bit thicker than other paints that I've used, and it really requires you to stir it up real good. So always my first step, pop that can open, stir it up real good, and then I'm going to peel some of this off, paintbrush. As you can probably tell, using one of my Annie Sloan brushes, just they're my favorite brushes, so no real reason why, other than I just like them. But it works just fine with this paint as well. Just get a little bit on there, and it goes on very smooth. Some of the other paints I've used, there's a little bit more catch to it, more friction. Friction is probably the best word. When you're pulling it, it seems to tug a little bit more on your brush. This doesn't really do that. It's very, smooth is probably the best word I can use. So with that, it goes on fairly easily. So what I like to do is just smear it on everywhere, but it will dry, you know, quick, as all these kind of milk paints, chalk paints do. So just get it in all the cracks everywhere you need it to be. And then for this one, we got the foam nail thing going on, so I got to dig down in there real good. But you just kind of slap it on, really, and then before it dries, then you kind of do your straight lines. And this is where I've had a lot of people ask, like, how do you get it looking like that? Do you spray it on? I've had people ask me a lot, do you spray paint your paint on because it looks even and smooth? Part of it's I have OCD, so I want it to be just right, so I do take my time with it a lot of times. But it's also just that last step. Like, you can just slap it on there, but if you leave it like that, that's what it's going to look like. So the last step, I always go over real nice smooth control strokes, and then what'll happen is gravity will just it'll settle and dry, and it just kind of flattens itself out as long as there's not big thick ridges of paint. So it's just one of those things, it's trial and error. The more you do it, the more you'll realize just how much your brush strokes matter, your pressure, how much the pressure matters, how much paint you use matters. The thing I always do with my first coat is I just don't use a lot of paint, because really that initial coat is just that. It's just an initial coat just to cover whatever's there, and then that second coat is usually where it's going to go on like perfect and really cover. The first coat's never going to cover. I mean, I don't care what kind of paint you're using. It's not going to cover with one coat, just not. So really you're just going to slap it on there, but with anything paint related, you're putting a layer of texture on there. So whatever you do at the bottom is going to show through more than likely. So again, for me, how I like to do it is get it slapped on there and just nice even strokes all the way down. Nice smooth lines. And then, like I said, gravity usually takes place, flattens those lines out real good, and then once you get that second coat on, it just completely covers it. And that's really it. Really like the milk paint. Like I said, it goes on really smooth, but it does dry quickly, so you can't really play around too much with it. Just get it down there, get your lines straight, get it how you want. If you want, you know, some textured lines straight through it, and lay it on a little thicker. For what I'm trying to do, I just want the black base, because we're going to do the copper over top, and we're going to pounce down to the black, so some of the black peeks through, but that's it. So that's it. This is what it's going to look like to start. Make those nails nice and black, so hopefully when I go back over it with the copper, be able to pull some of the black back out and then leave the copper all in all the other spots. So that's it for this step. Alright, so next step is going to be, after you've got the milk paint on there real good, and it only took 2 coats for this particular paint and the particular wood that I was using. I've done used this black paint before on a lighter color wood, and it took 3 coats. So it just depends on the wood. And then I knew I was going to cover the paint with the copper anyway, so if there was a couple of spots showing through, I wasn't too concerned over it. So now we're going to move on to the next step, which is to put a layer between your paint and then the copper we're going to do on top. And what I use for that is the high performance top coat, and I use flat pretty much 90% of the time. There's different levels of shine or sheen or whatever you want to call it. The flat still has a little bit of shine to it. The flat out flat, if you've never used, is really, that's the flat. That's the kind you want if you want a really no shine finish. But I use that very sparingly, usually when I'm really trying to get a specifically more waxed look to the finish. So if I'm going to mix a wax anti-Sloan done bottom with a general finished top, but I want the wax to match so it's not so shiny on top and kind of dull on bottom, I'll use the flat out flat. But for the most part, I use the regular flat. So what I'm using today, and I just have, is paper plate with aluminum foil just wrapped over the top of it. Just saves it so it doesn't stick to the plate. It does not stick at all to the aluminum foil unless you leave it here for hours. So it's just a great little in-between, so it's not sticking to it. I got a sponge brush. That's what I'm using to apply on the drawer. I actually used it on the entire piece except for the top. I used a pad applicator thing for the top. It's a whole nother process. But for the drawers, sponge brush. So I'm just going to dip it in there, just get it on there however you need to, and then you're going to go back and forth. I've had a lot of folks ask, do I spray it on? How do I get it on, make it look so smooth and all that kind of stuff? I don't spray anything. Paint, top coat, I don't. For me, this is kind of like art for me. So I enjoy the individual one-on-one, me and this piece kind of thing. And spraying, I think, starts to get towards the less of art and more of a factory done something. So for me personally, I brush, whether it's a sponge brush or a regular brush, everything. So with that being said, and you're wondering how that technique goes, for me, with a sponge brush, initially it's just getting it on there, really. As you can see, I'm just kind of sloppily throwing it on there initially. And then once it's on there, as you may or may not know, the top coat will dry quick, but not quite as quick as the chalk or the milk paint does. So you have some time to maneuver it around before it's gonna, cause streak marks or any of that kind of jazz. So ultimately, I'm just kind of haphazardly thrown on there like that. And then once you get it down to where you need it to, that's when you start going in nice streaked lines, if that's what you're looking for. Like if you're looking for it to not show, you don't want to see streaks, you don't want to see lines, you don't want to see brush marks, this is what you're going to do. Now initially, I'm not sure if you can see in the video, you're going to see streaks. But what's cool about this stuff is usually gravity takes hold and it flattens itself out. So as long as you don't have big, thick layers of it, it will flatten itself out. And then what's also very cool about this top coat is you can go back through and really find sandpaper and sand it down for a smooth finish. If you really, if you accidentally had a spot that got a little bit too much on it, you can take some sandpaper to it, which is a really cool thing for it. This particular piece, I'm just doing the single coat right now because, as I mentioned, I need a layer of protection between my paint and the copper that I'm going to put on there. Now something just happened I want to mention. I just had a piece of lint drop down in there. You're going to want to get those. If you got some lint layered t-shirt or something around, you're going to want to get those because that will stick to and really it'll be there unless you scrape it off later once this thing dries. Because once it dries, the poly is great stuff. Hardens pretty good. So, but anyway, this piece is going to take a little bit more time because I'm going to have to go around each individual little rivet on here just to make sure there's no excess. And you can see it in the video more than likely is it has that milky look don't want that. You want it to be smooth and almost clear. So a really thin layer. So this is going to take a little bit more time, just going over each one individually. Maybe get another sponge brush where I'm pulling some off because I might have got a little heavy with it. And that's all you do. Get another sponge brush out, and as you wipe, it'll absorb back into the sponge, just like a sponge would do. And then just continue smoothing it out. And as I said, once you get done and this dries, you will barely, if you can at all, I'll be surprised, notice your brush marks if you did it with a nice thin layer. So this is our next step. I'm going to finish this up, make it look all nice and smooth and pretty. But this is your next step. And then after that, we're going to apply the copper, and that's where we're going to get into the hammered copper look that this drawer is going to have, the other drawer is going to have, and the side panels to this piece are going to have. Excited to show you guys how that's going to turn out. So that's it for now. Alright, today we're going to do the next step on this hammered copper look that we're going to do, and this is the fun part. We finally get to the copper. So we've done the base coat. I did 2 coats to cover it completely, and then we did the poly, which is your separator, and which you're going to need to make sure it doesn't dry or stick too much. You could do it right over the paint. I have done it on a test thing just to see how it looked, and it worked about the same, but just for the maneuverability aspect, and if you're like, oh crap, I don't want it there, you can wipe it off if the poly's here, which is very helpful. So we have Pearl Effects, and this is copper pearl, and then this will be in the listing of things that you can buy. You don't have to. What I have done, instead of buying a stippling brush, which some of them can be pretty pricey, like $70 some of them that I found, I bought this masonry brush. Basically it's the same exact thing. The brushes are probably plastic rather than some kind of animal hair or whatever, but ultimately all we're going to be doing is pouncing it down on there. So I didn't see a reason to spend that much money, so I got one of these and it worked amazing. So this will be on the list, what kind it is. I think it costs $12, so very economical too. So first thing is you're just going to paint it on, and you want to be pretty generous with it. So what I did was pretty much do one normal coat first. So I'm going to paint that on. So just one little layer all the way across, and then once I had the one layer on, I'd see if I needed to add some more. It's definitely going to be a thicker look because you're going to have a texture to it, a thicker texture. So you're going to end up adding paint as you go, more than likely, just to make sure there's enough. So when you're doing the hammered copper look, it looks like there's hammered spots throughout. So we'll get to that here in a second. Let me paint this on. And I've already been using this brush, so it's pretty full of paint, so I can drag some off the sides here. And for this particular piece, I'm going all the way around over the nail heads, because what I'm going to do after that is, after this step, well, not the very next step, but the last step, I guess, is the glazing. We're going to glaze, which is going to give it some great shadowing effects in and around the nail heads, so it looks like, an older piece. So right now, we're going to just give it the copper part and then go from there. So laying it on real good and thick all the way around. Get this front side. And like I said, it's going to be very thick, but you'll all come together here in a second. Alright. Alright, now turn that back So what you're going to have is a very, slapped on paint look. Okay? So you could use your brush and just dab, 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 get the kind of the same effect. But what I decided to do, like I mentioned, is I got this bigger brush. It's just a little uneven. There's like, the paintbrush is a very even surface. For this, I don't want it to look even and perfect. I want it to look dented, like somebody actually went and hammered the copper. So, if you want a more even look, you can use one of your wax brushes, which is really flat and even, or you can get one of these where it's not quite that way. I want it to really look rough looking. So all you're going to do is take your brush and you're going to pounce right down on it. I'm not sure how much you can see from that far away. I'm going to stop and zoom in and show you what I see right up close here in a second. But I wanted to show you from a distance kind of thing how I'm doing it. And this is all you're going to do. You're going to go up and down. Now, if you hit and slide, it's obviously going to make lines. So if you don't want lines, which I don't want, you have to be kind of careful. Make sure you go up and down, up and down, up and down, and not down and slide. See that? Now you got a brush stroke. I don't want any brush strokes. But when you initially paint it on, you can just paint it on and have brush strokes all over the place, because once you do the stippling, it's going to take all them brush strokes away. So you're just going to go all the way around just like this. And it looks amazing. Like, it really looks like somebody went tap, 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 tap on some copper and left dents all through it. So you take a look at it, you're like, okay, that looks great, but it's not thick enough in spots. You take some more paint, slap it on there, and you want to do it fairly quickly because this will dry. And after it dries, then you go to do it again, it's going to cover your black. And as I probably mentioned in the other video, we want a little bit of the black to show through. That kind of looks cool when it looks like somebody hammered the copper and it made like a dent into it, which made that, took the color, the copper color away and made it like a darker color. So you're bringing some of the black out, and it just gives it more texture, another layer of, color, which looks really good. So I'm going to stipple the other side, but I'm going to zoom in and only show like my hands and how this is working so you can see that a little bit better. Alright, now I've zoomed in, you can see this side a little bit better. In the pictures you're going to be able to see probably the best of how this is going to turn out. But again, you're just going to take your brush, whatever brush you choose to use. You can use a wax brush or paintbrush, however you choose to do it. And you're just going straight up and down, straight up and down, straight up and down. You're just doing this over and over. And it's like you're putting little dents in what paint strokes you had in there. Now, we have brush strokes, like you can still see through here. You can give it a little twist like that and just take a little bit of the brush strokes out because it's starting to dry because I'm doing this video and I need to go a little bit faster because it will dry. So you're just going to go in here and continue that same process, just up and down, up and down. And it's just like making little dents in the paint and then also taking away the brush strokes. So it doesn't have that painted on look, which is not what we want. So that's it. And then if you have like a corner or something, you can take your brush and do the same effect and hit it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this brush around the outside. I'm just going to tap, 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 tap because this is a little bit big to go around the edges. So I just do the same effect. Nice little gentle tap. It's like pushing the paint up and popping it back up. So you have a part that's pushed down and a part that got pulled up, giving you that textured look. So you're just going to continue that until you get the desired result. And if you want more paint, you just slap some more paint on there and hit it again, which is probably what I'm going to do just to make it a little bit thicker looking, to get a little bit more texture. So that'll be it for this step. Then we're going to poly over top of this to create that barrier, and then we're going to do the glaze. Alright, now we got the copper on, we've done the stippling, gave it that kind of hammered copper look. And the next step is going to be doing the poly. We're going to poly over top of the copper the main reason for that is just you want that barrier between your paint and the glaze. The glaze you want to be able to play with a little bit, and when it's going directly over paint, it doesn't really let you do that too much. When it's got the poly between, you can still play and do whatever you want to do. Gives it a little bit longer time to dry, more maneuverability, but it will still dry just the same as it would over paint once it does dry. And then we'll do another coat of poly over top the glaze, just to seal everything in, I think, and then we'll be done. I'm gonna be honest with you, this has turned out really amazing. I've done this on a flat surface before. I've never done it with the curves and the bumps and all that kind of stuff, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out. Just such a cool textured look. It's not quite as bumpy and textured to the touch, because it really did flatten out, as I might have mentioned. The paint settles, but the stippling that you do to it gives it some really neat lines and spots where the black paint underneath, which was just so key to this process, popping out. So it just, I'm stoked, looks great. I'm loving it so far. I can't wait to get the glaze on to really antique it out a little bit. So simple process, same what we've done before with the previous step. We have our poly. I'm using the flat, got my sponge brush, one of those tricks, paper plate, aluminum foil. Easy, you don't have to have a special bowl laying around. My pad applicator fits in the paper plates, and you just throw it out when you're done. Sponge brushes wash out real well because it's water-based poly, so you can reuse and not have to go buy new sponge brushes all the time, which I don't like doing. So I'm going to get my sponge brush soaked up real good, and we're just going to slap some poly on here. And as I may have mentioned before, when you're doing the poly, it doesn't have to be like in any real neat, orderly fashion when you're getting it on initially. It's really just once it's on and you get it scattered all over the spots where you need it to, is when you just want to do one nice smooth stroke over the top to make sure you're not having a collection area of poly. This poly dries very clear, and you don't even know you polyed in some spots, even if it has gathered up. But it's really just so you don't have that puddle spot like paint does sometimes if you don't get it, especially like in your corners and stuff like that. So again, just going over what's cool about the sponge brush is just dabbing it down, and some poly sneaks out of your sponge brush for you over these nails. It's kind of a pain to get it down in there, but not with your sponge brush. You just sneak it down in there, and you're going to go across. And again, you get it all on there, and then you're just going to nice one long stroke. Nice one long stroke, just like that. And if you're not doing the hardware, obviously it makes it easier because you pull the hardware off. The one little trick though is your sponge brush has a tendency to rip and pull if you have any sharp edges around where your hardware was. So just be careful. Don't drag it across there too hard and rip your sponge brush, because again, you don't want to have to buy a bunch of these. Just want to reuse it, wash it out with the water-based stuff. So just be careful. So that's going to be it for this step. I'm going to finish going around the edges, but this is all we're doing. We're just getting one thin layer on here. Nice clean lines. Nothing that's going to show it when we do the wax or the glaze too much. But just enough to coat everything over once real quick. That's it. And the next step is the glaze, and I can't wait to see how this is going to finish up. Alright, now to the fun part. We have gone through all those steps to finally get to this one last step that's just going to totally change this entire piece. The glaze is going to give it that aged copper look over top of what we have done, which is basically a stippling, which is kind of giving it that hammered copper look. But it's very shiny right now, which is not really what I'm going for. I want it more of an aged look. So what we're going to do, I already worked on a mirror that's going to this piece. So I have my glaze mixed with the extender, which I have right here. Great stuff. Or maybe raise up a little higher, make sure you see it. Great stuff. Basically what that's going to do is give it longer before it dries on you. So what I ended up doing was doing a half and half, so 50-50 extender to glaze ratio. That just depends on you. Once you play with it a little bit, you kind of get an idea of what that means. Basically, you know, if you want like 3 parts glaze, 1 part there's 2 of them. Extender, not accelerator. I want to say accelerator, but extender. So if it's 3 parts glaze, 1 part extender, then it's going to be a little thicker and dry a little quicker. If you do half and half, it's going to be a little thinner and take a little bit longer to dry, which gives you more time to play. So that's kind of the idea. So the more extender you put in, the waterier it's going to be, if that's a word, and the longer you're going to have time to play with it. And since we polyed over top of our pearl effects, then it's not going to stick really, I mean, not at all really, as long as you know you play with it before it dries. So really fairly easy to use. The trick is, you know, what you do once it's on there and how you artistically decide what stays, what goes. It's kind of like you're doing with some of the anti-slung waxes. You jab it into the corners and the spots, and then you wipe off the areas you don't want it to be. Same kind of thing, but it's more of a watery feel to it. So of course, if you've seen on one of my videos, main glaze, baby wipes, always have handy. This time around I just have a cotton rag, which seemed to have worked really well because in this particular case, I'm going to want a haze of black over the whole thing. So the baby wipes would pull it all off, which I don't really want. I want to have a nice haze of black over all this to show all my stippling marks, and it's really going to show up amazing with the glaze. And then leave a little bit down in the corners and around all the nail heads to give it that real antique look. So just get some on your brush, however you want to do it, and you paint it on. And as I said, it's going to be watery with a 50, it had 50-50, half and half, however you want to call it. So you really kind of have to be careful a little bit because it'll drip all over the place if you're not careful. So, and if you've never glazed before, you're probably freaking out as you're watching me do what I'm doing right here. Because you're like, what is he doing? He's totally going to jack up that project. But as I mentioned probably numerous times, as long as you got that poly on there, you really don't have anything to worry about. Because I could almost go over with my baby wipes and wipe this right off and it would almost not even be here because of that poly separation. So you can see it's very, very watery. But as it dries, it thickens and hardens and does what it needs to do. This is how I like it when I'm doing glazes, usually 50-50 or pretty close to it, just because it gives me a lot more flexibility. Because ultimately what I can do is go back and hit it a second time if I didn't get enough because it's too watery and it pulled a lot off. So it gives you just a little bit more flexibility. So if you do like 5 parts to 1 and it dries super quick and you didn't get it off and it's super thick, then you know, thick is no good. Same thing with the waxes. You put too much on, can't get it off, and then you're stuck. And then you got to do the mineral spirits thing to get it all off. Pain in the butt. So this, you just got to go back over it, hit it a second time if there's spots I feel like I need to, and I probably will around the nail heads just to ensure that I get the thickness I want to really antique it out really good. Because again, we're going for that hammered copper, aged copper look for this piece. So okay, there you go. Looks like a mess, right? So now I'm going to take my rag and simply wipe it off, just like so. Just like you would with baby wipes. And then as your rag gets thick with it, you're going to need to switch it over to another side. So you're just going to continue this and keep dragging it across until you get the desired result. Okay, so I want it to have a hazy look, so I'm probably going to leave a little bit of the rag with the black on it, so as I'm pulling, I'm leaving some on and pulling some off kind of at the same time. Because if I got as clean of a rag as possible, it would pull this almost completely off because of that poly we have on there. So, and this is just looking awesome. Love this look. Really gets the glaze really gets down all the little stippling, you know, puncture marks, that whatever you want to call it, the hammered copper look that we did. It really gets down into them. It draws out the black that we left poking out. I mean, it's just really, really cool stuff. So this is, I mean, this is really it. I mean, this. And then, like I said, as it dries, it's going to harden, just as the wax does. So you just have to determine how much you want. So if you can see it, I'm not sure if you can, there's probably reflections of the light, and you can see it's really thick and watery looking in those spots. Well, that's kind of what I want, because I want it to be that aged copper look. Well, you know, copper ages, it darkens in its corners and cracks and crevices in areas. I got some bristles on there. Okay, so now what I just did, you probably couldn't see real well, is I pulled too much off, so I got a darker spot of my rag and just wiped over top. And you see, I don't know if you can see that, but basically what that did was it added more to my piece just by using the rag rather than having to get the brush back out, because I don't want to brush more on. Because as it's drying, it's thickening, almost like the wax, and then you can kind of just like dig in there and wipe it around, and he's like, man, this is looking really good. I'm super excited about how this is turning out. I've done this on flat surface before, but not with the nail heads. And I think that's just what's really going to make this piece really cool, because it really looks like somebody took some copper, put it over top, and nailed this thing in. So really excited about how this is coming out. So yeah, so you're going to have the streaks from your initial fuse wipes because it was so thick. I had it pretty watery and thick right off the bat. But as you go, it's going to thicken and get like a, there's going to be more friction between you and the piece. At first it's like wiping water off a table, and then after a while it gets thicker and thicker, and that's when it becomes where you can really play with it and make it exactly what you want it to be. So I can dig in between these nail heads and pull some of this out that I don't want all over. You know, I just want a little thickness around the bottoms of the nail heads and the crack. And then what's even cooler, I can go to my clean side and I can wipe a little bit harder. It's going to cause a little bit of friction between me and the piece, but I can wipe it off almost down to the poly at this point too, and we're 3 minutes in because we did the 50-50 ratio, because it's still not going to be completely dry for, you know, a while. So wow, yeah, this, I'm super happy with this. So anyway, so that's going to be it. I'm going to go over each nail head probably with a cleaner spot, which will take some time, so I'm not going to video that whole part, but basically just to bring out some shine to that, and probably the raised area all the way around, leaving some glaze but not a lot. But just in those raised areas where, you know, the recessed areas get darker and dingier over time, the raised areas don't, because they get touched and rubbed on and all that kind of stuff. So we're trying to create a more realistic effect. So taking what was a piece of wood and making it look like copper. So that's it for this step. I may or may not poly, I'm not really sure yet. It depends on how it ends up looking once it completely dries. You don't have to, but it just depends on how the durability factor of what this piece may or may not have done to it. You know, it's not something that's going to get touched or rubbed on, or, you know, it's not a top of a surface, so I don't necessarily need to poly it. So it just depends. If it really looks amazing how it is and I don't want to mess with it, then I probably will leave the poly out. So that may be the next step. If not, this will be the finishing step for you, depending on what you'd like to do with that final step. Because I've already gone through how to poly over top of the same piece. So you have that idea for that step as far as what to do with poly. It would be the same exact procedures as what you're doing now. It just depends if that's what you want to do with it or not. So again, as it's drying, I can pull some more off, leave some more on, and kind of give it like some streaky marks through it like a copper would. But that's it. Again, I'm going to go back over the nail heads and take off some of the shine, or some of the glaze a little bit more, just to give it a little bit more shine on the raised areas. But that's it. This is your piece. This is your hammered copper, hammered aged copper for sure, finish.